This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm Dahlia Shendlin.
And I'm Gilad Halpern.
If you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon because we're counting on you. Every week, we bring you interviews with authors of books and research and other things that we think are important and fascinating. Today's interview is brought to you by the Tel Aviv University Stephen Roth Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism and Racism.
Our guest today is Professor Havi Dreifuss from the Department of Jewish History at Tel Aviv University, who specializes in the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. She is the head of the Institute for the History of Polish Jewry and Israel-Poland Relations at Tel Aviv University, as well as the head of the Center of Holocaust in Poland, which is part of the International Institute for Holocaust Research at Yad Vashem. Her book, Relations Between Jews and Poles During the Holocaust, The Jewish Perspective, was published in English by Yad Vashem in 2017. Professor Havi Dreifuss, hello and welcome back to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, good afternoon.
So, to start off with maybe a general question, how do you define the notion of Jewish-Polish relations? The Holocaust and the preceding years elicited such complex social processes in Poland that the triangle of Jews, Poles, and then the German invaders elicited a wide range of responses from collaborators to righteous Gentiles. It seems like everything could fall under that category. How do you unpack it?
So, as I said, today we know a little bit more about this very, very complicated issue, and we know that it's much more than collaborators, righteous among the nation, and indifferent. We understand that the relations between Poles and Jews during the Holocaust were shaped, as you said, by the German occupation, but also by the interaction between Jews and Poles before the war and during the war.
Well, what were you actually seeking to understand? I mean, you explain that this is not really a book about how Poles treated Jews, but how Jews perceived Polish attitudes towards them. Why did you feel this was such an important dimension that was missing in the scholarship?
So I had the impression, which I must admit I still have, that much was written and much is still written about what Poles did to Jews who tried to flee from Nazi occupiers, or what was the attitude and the deed of Poles towards Jews. I felt that there's not enough information about the Jewish perspective, which in many sense shaped their actions much more than what the Poles did or didn't do. Because when a Jew was trying to understand what is going during the Holocaust and trying to determine if he should try to escape, where he should try to escape, what is the reaction of the Polish attitude or the Polish surroundings to this suffering? Many times he didn't really know what is going on. And I thought, and his acts were shaped by his beliefs, by his delusions. And I thought that this is an aspect that we should refer to, especially when so little was known about it. Now, the problem is that, as both of you said, this issue of Polish-Jewish relations is a very tense one and changed dramatically during the war and even afterwards. So I understood I cannot rely on testimonies given after the war because really people don't admit if they change their views or understanding during the time. We used to say, I always knew that this and this will happen. From the very first day, my father said that this or that will happen and things like that. My work is based mainly on wartime documents written by Jews throughout occupied Poland, in which I'm trying to understand what they think and see within the Polish surrounding during those years.
In what sense was the German invasion a turning point in the relations of Jews and Poles in Poland? What was it before and how did it change in the immediate aftermath of the invasion?
So the German occupation is a turning point in any sense that one can think of. Any aspect of the life of Jews and, of course, of Poles was changed because of the occupation, and this is, of course, something we should all bear in mind. Regarding the relations, of course, there were many different aspects of Polish-Jewish relations before the war. On the one hand, many times we hear, and this is rightly so, that it's not by a coincidence that so many Jews lived in Poland between the two world wars. There is a reason that this community consists of so many Jews who, many of them, even if temporarily, saw Poland as their home. On the other hand, Poland, of course, Jews in Poland, of course, suffered from different hatred, sometimes more traditional hatred, other times more modern anti-Semitism and other aspects. So things were not simple before. But and things were seen differently by Poles and by Jews also between the two world wars. And we can just take as an example the Bund Party. The Bund Party is the largest Jewish party between the two world wars, which was, of course, the socialist working party within Polish Jewry, thought that the Jews in Poland should be part of the general struggle of changing the economics and the society and so on. And they saw Poland as their home. But from the Polish point of view, many times the fact that those Jews who were on the one hand socialist, on the other hand didn't become part of the PPS, of the Polish Socialist Party, was seen in a very different way. So the different perspectives were there before the war. During the war, and due to the harsh German occupation and the fact that they made a great difference between the Jews and the Poles from the very beginning, everything, of course, changed.
But I was also struck by the fact, I just want to go back a little bit, I was struck by some of your documentation about the increasing forms of persecution of Jews in Poland in various ways prior to the Nazi occupation. And I wonder if you can describe at what point did those other forms of persecution from the Polish authorities begin? I mean, it seems to me like you document roughly, including in the 1930s. And how threatened did Jews of Poland feel, if you can generalize, before the Nazi occupation?
Okay, so as historians, we don't really like to generalize, although this is something we all the time do. The second half of the 30s were difficult times for the Jews in Poland. And this is after Pilsudski's death and the fact that the right-hand, it's not only party, the whole communication and atmosphere and political atmosphere have changed. Partly also because the influence of Germany, and we have to remember that from 1934 there is the pact between Poland and Nazi Germany. And part of the changes in the challenges Poland had to face, and we're talking about the Great Depression of 1929 and other things. But the second half of the second half of the 30s were difficult times for Polish Jews, because this is the first time when one can speak of specific anti-Semitic legislation within Poland. This is the time where there is legislation against the halachic, the Jewish law, shchita, slaughter. There is
ritual slaughter of kashrut laws.
Exactly. There is an attempt to pass this law. There is also an attempt to harm Jews from the economical point of view, in which we're talking about high-ranking Polish officials who are saying, well, we won't beat Jews or anything like that, but an economical boycott is something that should be very much blessed. They use the Polish word option, which is in Hebrew adraba. I don't know how to translate it in a very good way to Polish, but this is something that we all should do. And actually, from 1936, we can find programs in many small localities in Poland. One of the most famous ones is the one in Pshitek, but there were in many other places. And this, of course, had impact on the feeling of the security of the Jews. In this sense, I also have to mention the ghetto benches, which were in Polish universities, in which Jewish students many times were not allowed to sit in the classroom like any other student, and this is after numerous clauses and other steps taken against Jews. So the mid-30s were a difficult time for Jews. On the same hand, we should say that from 1938 we can see a decrease in those acts, it seems as if Poland as a country, as a society, starts to understand that Germany is not only something that will provide them profit, and this also had some impact on the Jews. But the second half of the 30s were definitely not pleasant times for Polish Jews.
There could be two ways in which the Nazi invasion affect Jewish-Polish relations. One is when a foreign invader comes into the fore, what it normally, the response it creates is making the other side unite against it. And the other is maybe exacerbate the divisions that, as you describe, were already in place. Which of the two happened?
So I think that during the Holocaust you can find both. Yet in the beginning, when Poland was still struggling against the Nazi invasion, you can see Nazi Germany invasion, you can see Poles and Jews that feel that they are fighting together. Of course, there are some segments of the Polish society we see that see things differently, but generally speaking, there is the fight against the invaders. Things changed dramatically as soon as the occupation started, because one of the interesting things is to see when you read wartime accounts of Jews is that for quite a long time, months and even years, some of them continued to see it as a joint suffering. The Germans are trying to harm the Jews and the Poles. Poland has paid a very severe price during this occupation, and we're together in these awful times. But from the Polish point of view, and when you look at what is happening within the Polish surroundings, things are, of course, very clear from the very beginning that Poles and Jews are not the same. They're not the same because Nazi Germany enforced its racial, anti-Semitic policy from the very beginning. So while many Jews continue to see the positive aspect of the Polish, you cannot say the same thing when you look at the full picture.
I have to say that there's one photograph in the book that to me seemed to, well, there's many interesting photographs, but one that seemed to really sum up, the tragedy of this era of the eve of the invasion of religious Jews digging trenches alongside Poles. And I thought it's a very moving picture, except that it's also a chilling photograph because I noticed that it was taken at Auschwitz. I'm never sure if I'm saying that correctly, which is, of course, where Auschwitz was later established. And so I want to try to understand, on the one hand, there seems to be these moments of solidarity between them. And certainly the Jews felt like we are, part of the Polish nation trying to defend, or some Jews felt like they were trying to defend against the invaders. Is this a story of Jews simply having misplaced trust in their sense of citizenship in the Polish nation, and then the Poles ultimately sort of betraying them, or is it not quite that simple?
Things are never that simple. But from the Jewish point of view, they saw the danger of Nazi Germany as something that is much more powerful than any disagreements they had with Poland before. And one of the things that we have to remember that Poland, despite all the criticism that even Polish Jews sometimes had, it was their home. Many of them, and this is something we don't always remember, most of Polish Jewry spoke Polish. They were part of this state. They saw themselves in this or that sense as part of this country. And when it was occupied, I'm citing, for example, this document by one Jew who says, we have here a triple fight against Nazi Germany. It's not only attacking our home country, it's not only the one that has attacked our brothers within Germany, the German Jews, but we all know the effect it had on the Polish political atmosphere, and as soon as we will defeat Nazi Germany, things will be better in Poland. So they saw this attack as something that could unite them all. But as you said, things were different. Now, if you look at not only the photos, but also the headlines of Jewish newspapers, and of course the diaries that we have, during the very first days and weeks of the German invasion to Poland, were very much worried of what will happen to Poland as a country. They They are talking about the suffering of the Polish nation and about how different important places, palaces, museums, and other castles are being bombed and ruined by Nazi Germany. They see themselves as part of this nation. Later on, things change, but that many times much later.
A lot of what you're describing now, Havi, and if we go back to what you said earlier about the lacuna in the research about the feelings of the Jews towards the Polish people and the Polish nation, of course, one cannot escape thinking about a similar parallel case that was thoroughly researched and written about, and that is of German Jews on the eve of the Nazi victory, and during the Weimar years and the Nazi years as well. Of how, but of course the German case was quite different because unlike what you said earlier about the preceding years, in many ways German Jews felt quite secure in their home country and not ambivalent about it at all. And then the Nazis came and everything fell apart. Does the Polish case echo the German case at all? Do you think that the drawing parallels is useful in any way?
Drawing parallel always helps because we see what is resemble and what doesn't resemble. We many times talk about German Jews who felt so much part of the German society before Nazi came to power and how they felt betrayed by Germany itself. Now, part of this documentation that you read from Polish Jews could very much resemble Polish Jews who saw themselves a part of the Polish nation, just don't understand how come their country doesn't see them as the victims of Nazi Germany who has occupied Poland. But on the other hand, of course, there are also many differences. I will just add and say this is true not only regarding German Jews, but if you look, for example, at Jews in France or in countries which was under its influence, many times countries are not only the concrete state, but they also are part of a myth. And when France is starting to collaborate with Nazi Germany, the Vichy regime and things like that, there are Jews in France as well as in other localities which were very much influenced by France. And here I'm talking about North Africa, who are talking about how France had betrayed all the things that it has resembled in the past. So countries always have their concrete reaction to or attitude to citizens, and Jewish citizens included, but also the mix. And Polish Jews also, with all the complicated attitudes they had to Poland between the two world wars. Poland was a country in which, for hundreds of years, Polish Jewry flourished. They had their history. They were part of this country, part of this nature. And when things changed so dramatically, it had, of course, influence on their life, but also on their beliefs and on the way they grasped themselves and their surroundings.
On that note, I was wondering about one of your sort of approaches to analyzing the documentation. You pointed out that there's sort of a literary device. I considered it a literary psychological device among the Jewish writers at the time who referred to that you referred to as persuasive definition and comforting interpretation, which is the way certain Jewish writers portrayed the Poles in a positive light. And I want to know, do you think that these writers did so consciously? Did they have a purposeful intention or an interest in portraying the Polish behavior positively towards Jews? Or was it simply part of the instinct that you're talking about of citizens trying to view their country in a positive way?
So maybe first I'll try to explain what I'm trying to claim there. A Jew that is walking in the street and somebody throws stones at him, he can describe it later in his diary as those thugs who are throwing stones at me, or it could be those Poles who never wanted to see me in the street and now have the opportunity to throw stones, or in any other way. Or in later years, when a Pole is assisting a Jew who is fleeing from Nazi Germany, and he's doing it really as a righteous among the nation, Somebody can say, well, you see here the real attitude of Poles towards their Jewish brothers and the way that they help us. Or you can say, well, this person, although he's Polish, he's doing it in a contradictory to the way that all other Poles are referring to us. So the question is not only what is the experience of the Jews, but how they define them and how do they write them in wartime accounts. And one of the interesting things that I saw is that in early years, many times even very hard attitudes of Poles, which are being written in Jewish diaries, are reading in a positive way. Those who are harming us are not the true Poles. They are only the margin of the society. They don't really understand. They don't really mean it. It's the true Poland. We'll see them today, and we'll see them in the future in a negative way. This is not our Poland. In later years, you can see any negative attitude of the Poles that described as something that is characteristic to the Poles who always hated the Jews and never wanted them to be part of the society and so on. Now, what I was asking in this research is not what happened, but how Jews saw it. And one of the things that I saw is that in the early years, Jews described those acts in a very positive way, and later on in a very negative way. Now, I don't think that this is something that somebody goes home and says, well, I'm looking at those people who threw stones at me or who pointed me out in this long line waiting for bread, or who did any other negative act towards me. I don't think that anybody's sitting back in his house and thinking, well, should I describe them as Poles or as a margin of the society or as thugs? Those are things that we're doing or writing many times in an unconditional way, not really thinking of it. But this is very important because it helps us to expose how people grasp their surroundings. And this helps us to indicate that in the earlier years, despite all the experience of Jews under Nazi occupation, they still almost were hanging on this positive image of the Polish nation. And almost anything negative done by Poles were characterized as something which is not really part of Poland or the true Poland. Later on, you can see a 180-degree shift. Everything that is done is only to chase them, to kill them, to murder them. And of course, the truth in both periods of time was a little bit more complicated.
Havi, can you say a word or two about the documents that you used, about the sources? Because you said, and also you elaborate a lot in the book about how they were all wartime documents written by Jews in real time. How did they, can you tell us the story of these documents, how they survived the war when, people barely did?
Okay, so one of the really amazing things that I had I experienced during this research is really reading the numerous accounts written by Jews during the Holocaust. And this is amazing because we have dozens of diaries and accounts written by Jews. We have thousands of pages written by men and women, young and old, from big localities and smaller places. As I said before, it was important for me to look at wartime accounts because I wanted to see what people thought during the war and not how they reshaped their memory. Now, we know today if one reads the documents or testimony gathered in Israel, Poland, the States, or any other locality, you can see some kind of biases because we as human beings, not as Holocaust survivors, we as human beings, people as human beings, tend to describe the past according to the present. So if I live in Israel, I will try to explain the Holocaust years by my experience in Israel. And if I live in Poland, I will try to explain it by my experience in present Poland and so on. And this is why for me it was so important to look at wartime accounts. And what I try to do is to look at three kinds of wartime accounts. One of them is daily diary. And those are diaries which people just write in a daily form. Today, Monday, the 20, whatever of this or that month, I saw this and experienced that. Tomorrow, this is what I experienced. So this is one kind of account. And this is very important because if those are long diaries, many times you can see how people change their own views throughout the time. A second kind of documents were wartime documentation or testimonies. People that at year 41 or 42, somebody is asking them to write what happened to them until this point. It could be part of a Ringeboom archive at Warsaw. It could be for other usage. The people are trying to recall what happened to them until that point. It could be somebody that is starting a daily diary, but is starting it only at 1941 or 2, and then he's trying to say what happened until this point. The third kind of documentation is wartime memoirs. And those are people that in the year 1943, 1944, tried to write what happened to them until that point. It could be because one of them hears about the Allies landing at Normandy. It could be because any other reason. And then they're starting to tell the whole story from the very beginning. You know, there are a few accounts in which somebody wrote a daily diary and later accounts, and then you can see the difference. But even if not, you can see how different, in what different ways Jews describe their Polish surroundings, as well as other things in those daily accounts as daily diaries, and in later accounts as wartime memoirs. And this is something I try to be very, very sensitive and not just put all the wartime accounts into one collection, which is difficult to understand the changes that happened during the war.
Well, I think it does give an extremely immediate picture that's rarely seen when you, at least in my experience of going through, literature and museums and academic literature. This gives a sense of up close experience of what's going on in real time. And I think that the picture that emerges, to my mind, Gilad can tell me if he agrees, is very complex. Like you said, it's not a simple storyline of the Poles did this and the Jews believed that. And it's much more complex and nuanced. And I just wonder, in light of what is now a very fiery debate over the role of Poland and Polish people under occupation in the Holocaust, and sometimes a debate that reaches very angry proportions, very politicized tones. Have you been criticized? Has this book been seen as falling out on one side or the other? Or do people see it as for what it is, I think, which is a really, accurate, inclusive historic rendition of the complexity of Polish behavior?
Can I rephrase Dalia's question in perhaps a more neutral way and ask you, how do you think your study and the insights that it brought up shed light on that, on the debate, and help bring it to its real proportions?
As both of you said, Polish-Jewish relations are in the midst of a very, very tense argument. Only part of it is historical. Much of it became political, unfortunately. But from the historical point of view, I can say that thanks to the work of many excellent researchers, many of them Poles, we know much more about Polish-Jewish relationship. And things that were in the past very simplistic, as we always thought that we're talking about collaborators, righteous among the nations, and indifference. They understand that the word indifference, the term indifference, is a challenging one, because if somebody doesn't act to help or to harm the Jews, it doesn't mean that he is indifferent to them. It could be that he has many other reasons not to act. Today we know that people harm the Jews not only because of anti-Semitism, but it could be because of terror, because of fear, because of personal fights that they had with the Jews before, and many other things. So we know much more about Polish-Jewish relationships thanks to research written in the last 3 years. My book mainly, I hope so, mainly contributes to the Jewish point of view. And this is important because you could hear things which are not things by historians but by politicians, that Jews did not want to flee to the Poles because they didn't know them, they didn't know the language, and actually even trying to portray the Jews as those who should be blamed in their deaths because, so many Poles were waiting to help them and so on. And I do hope that in this way, in this means, my book will contribute to this ongoing attempt to understand better those very difficult years and showing what Jews thought or didn't think, what they believe in, what did they fear from. And in that sense, I hope it helps this very, very troubling discussion, which is troubling because it's not only a historical one, but it became political, and this is something that is very, very problematic.
Because your book could be co-opted by those on the Polish side who would like to, maybe absolve the Poles of any responsibility by saying, look, the Jews actually in real time, many of them said that, they felt had positive feelings about the Polish nation, and therefore, in a way, it's the Germans' fault, not ours.
Except that I think that your book shows exactly the other side as well.
Yeah, the whole question is how it is co-opted and whether it is co-opted at all.
Well, first of all, as we open this conversation, we have to remember that everything that is happening in Poland during the Holocaust is under Nazi occupation. This is, of course, important. But I do hope that if somebody will come and try and use this very early Jewish segment of a diary saying that the Poles are wonderful and how they try to help the Jews, this will now be understood in a broader context, as well as if somebody will say later that all of the Poles didn't do nothing but seek for Jews and so on. So I mainly hope that it will give the context and the explanation of how complicated things were. And they were complicated because they were different in bigger cities and smaller places, in early times and in later times, and an affiliation that Polish Jews had as well as their own experience. But I also do hope that it will bring again, which you can find again in many of these works written by wonderful historians, but it will give the place for the Jewish documents to talk about what happened during the war, because those were active people who tried to understand the reality, who tried to act, tried to do the best that they could. Many times they didn't understand their surroundings, but this doesn't mean that they didn't try to understand it, to do the best of what they thought they understand of the Holocaust.
All right, Professor Havi Dreifuss, thank you very much for joining us today to talk about your book, Relations Between Jews and Poles During the Holocaust, The Jewish Perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Gilad.
And also thanks to Itai Shalom, our sound engineer and producer, and again to the Roth Institute for the generous support. And now we've got a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcast app and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. All you have to do is go to the ratings and review section and write one. You too can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Every little helps. Check out our archive. It has about 600 interviews to keep you busy, entertained, and hopefully annoyed. And if you like what we do here, you can also like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast Ideas from Israel. And follow me and Dalia on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from Dalia and from me, goodbye.